So far we've created a landscape in Gaia, imported it into Unreal, and set world partition and HLODs. Today, that gray landscape is looking a little sad. Let's spruce it up with some grass, dirt, and stone material. Let's jump right into it and create a material. Right-click the context menu and select New Material, and let's name it M_landscape. Go ahead and open it. In the Materials Detail panel in the lower left, we have a bunch of settings. Set Use Material Attributes Output Pinned to True. This condenses the output, so instead of showing each attribute individually, we collapse them into a collection. This is ideal for our landscape layers, as we will soon see. Next, right-click the graph and search for Landscape Layer Blend. We're going to pass our grass, dirt, and stone layers into this blend for painting our landscape. Click on Landscape Layer Blend. In the Details panel, our landscape layers are an array. Click the plus button to add an element to the array and name it grass. Next, right-click the graph and search for Set Material Attributes. We are going to build a set of attributes for our grass layer with this node. Let's go ahead and connect its output to the Landscape Layer Blend grass input, and then connect its output into M Landscape's Material Attributes node. Then click on Set Material Attributes node, and in its Details panel, there is an attribute set types array. Press the plus button to add an element. We're going to set our first attribute to base color. Pull off the base color input node and add a texture sample node. Now we need grass texture to use. Luckily, there are a bunch of free materials on Fab. To get to Fab, open the context menu and click the Fab button. Select Material and Textures on the left, and under Filters, set Only Free. Now you can use any of these, but I'm going to use lawn grass. Select Add to Project, and that will place the textures in your project at Content, Fab, Megascans, Surfaces. I don't like working with the default names, so I'm going to edit them to include lawn grass. Now that we have our texture, go back to the texture sample in our material and set it to the lawn grass base color texture. This is about as simple of a landscape blend material as possible. Let's apply it to our landscape. Go back to our viewport, and in our outliner, go to your landscape object. We will assign our material to the landscape through the landscape material setting. Now before we do, we should create an instance of our material. An instance will allow us to tweak the parameters of our material in the level. To do that, right-click our material, and in the context menu, select Create Material Instance. Rename it so its prefix is MI_ for Material Instance. Now back to our landscape object. Under the landscape section, we can set landscape material to our MI landscape material instance. It's going to draw everything black, but that's expected. In the upper left, change the viewport mode from selection mode to landscape mode. Then go to Paint tab, Target Layers section, and click the Create Layers from Assign Materials button. This should make a grass layer appear. Next, press the plus button next to the grass layer. This will create a layer info object. This object stores where we've painted the grass. Now if we select grass and try to paint, it will apply. There is probably a better way, but I like to make our brush giant, turn off the fall off, set the strength to 1, and paint everything. Everything is grass painted, but it's tiling like crazy and shiny. Remember, we only set the base color, not how light bounces off of our material. So let's flesh out the grass layer by adding the other textures to it. Go back to M Landscape Material, select the Set Materials attribute node, and add some more attributes. We'll add normal, ambient occlusion, roughness, and metallic. Then right-click the graph and add 2 more texture sample nodes. Set the first texture to our long grass normal map. Unreal should set sampler type to normal. If not, change it manually. Then for the second texture, set it to lawn ORM texture. The normal map texture RGB can feed into the normal input node. The ORM texture is a channel packs texture. Each channel contains different information. The R channel contains ambient occlusion, G contains roughness, and B contains metallic. It makes sense B looks blank, because there is no metallic in our grass. So back in our material, we can feed the R into ambient occlusion, G into roughness, and B into metallic. So now the grass has some roughness to it, but it is still very shiny. Let's add a specular attribute to our set material attributes node and set it to a scalar parameter named grass specular, and let's set its default to 0. Now our grass isn't so shiny. Next up, let's reduce the tiling. Back in the material graph, add a texture coordinate node. Drag off it and add a multiply node. Then drag off the other multiply input and let's set a scalar parameter. Name it grass tiling and set its default value to 1. Now just drag the output into the UV input for our 3 texture samples. If we open up our material instance, go to Global Scalar Parameters, check grass tiling, and we can adjust it. 0.1 makes our tiling slightly less, but it still looks pretty bad. So let's refactor our material with a built-in node called Texture Bomb. Right-click the graph and search for Texture Bomb. Unfortunately, our texture sample won't work. Drag off Texture Object input and search for Texture Object. Let's set the texture object to our long grass base color. Next, we can copy-paste the grass tiling node and pass it into our tiling input. Then drag off the offset input and create another scalar parameter. Let's name it grass offset and set its value to 1. Finally, drag off the isNormalMap input node and search for static bool. Let's set it to false. The result of the texture bombing node can then be fed into the set material attribute base color. Let's repeat for normal map and ORM. Only difference is on the normal map, the texture bombing bool is set to true. For the ORM, we want to split out the RGB to pass into the set materials attributes. That's not hard. Off the texture bombing result, search for split components and it will give us RGB. Now we can get rid of the text coordinate node and multiplier. If we go back to our viewport, we can experiment with the tiling and offset to get the results we want. I'm not going to mess with this too much, as we're going to add some macro variation next. We broke up the tiling some, but the grass still feels odd. It still has a splotchy pattern. Let's add a layer of macro variation on top of our grass. To do that, we will multiply our grass base color with a black and white noise texture to break up the repetition. Thankfully, UE5 comes with a texture just for this purpose. Go back to our material and create a texture sample node. Set its texture to T macro variation. Then let's get a text coord node and we're going to multiply it by a really small number. This is going to make the texture really big on our landscape. I'm going to make it a scalar parameter named macro v1 and set its default value to 0.04. Let's pass that value into our texture samples UVs. If we preview the node, we can see it's just some black and white noise. If we make the UV multiplier larger, we can better see the texture. Then let's copy-paste our nodes. Let's rename the second scalar parameter macro v2 and let's set its value to 0.01. Then we will multiply the two nodes together to make the variation even more complicated. You could do more texture samples, but 2 is enough for now. We want to control how intense the effect is, so we will pass the result into an add node. Let's make the value we are adding a scalar parameter and name it macro harshness. The more we add to the texture, the more white it becomes, and the more muted the effect is. We'll see this in action in a second. Let's pass the output of the add node into our saturate node to clamp its output values between 0 and 1. Then let's multiply the grass base color by the macro variation and see what that does. Immediately we can see the results. It's a little too splotchy for my preference. If we increase the harshness value, you can see the variation become fainter. If we decrease the macro variation values, we make the macro texture larger on the landscape. Play around with the values, but 0.01 and 0.001 seem pretty good to me. Now let's repeat the process with dirt. We don't want to have to copy-paste the macro variation logic again, so highlight them, right-click, and select Collapse to Function. Let's name our function mf_ for material function macro variation. Now, what if we want to toggle our macro variation on and off? Well, there's a node for that. Right-click the graph and search for static switch parameter. Let's name it grass use macro variation. We can change its value in the material instance to turn it on or off. Let's pass the result of our macro variation and base color multiplication into the true node, and just the base color attributes into the false node. I'm going to clean up these nodes a bit. And then let's pass the result of our switch node into the set material attributes base color. Now if we go to our viewport, we can toggle the macro variation on and off. Pretty neat. So we did grass, now let's do some dirt and stone. Let's go to Fab and find a dirt and stone material. Go to Fab, Material Textures on the left side, and search for stone. Icelandic rock cliff is good. Let's add to project. Again, I'm going to change the texture names. You don't have to. I just think it's easier to work with. Next, get some dirt texture. Dirt ground looks good. Then we're going to duplicate our nodes from grass to create dirt and rock. Highlight all the grass nodes, Ctrl+C for copy, and Ctrl+V for paste. Then we will swap out the grass textures for dirt textures and change the scalar parameters to dirt tiling and dirt offset. We also need to change the specular param to dirt specular, and our macro variation switch to dirt use macro variation. Finally, let's add another layer attribute to our landscape layer blend. Name it dirt and pass our material attributes into it. Alright, let's go ahead and make another layer for stone and do the whole process over again. I'm going to speed this part up since you already saw it twice. Once we are done, let's go to the viewport. Landscape mode and paint. Click the Import Layers button again. It's going to add our dirt and stone layers. Go ahead and click the plus button to create layer info objects. If you are using Unreal Engine before version 5.7, it'll show you a pop-up. Select Weighted Blend. If you're using 5.7 or later, open up each layer's layer info object and set the blend method to Weight Blending Legacy. Now we can paint our dirt and stone layers. You can mess with the material instance to mess with how the materials look. You will find pretty quickly that painting manually is tedious. In the next video, let's use landscape masks to paint our stone and dirt layers automatically. Stick around and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thanks, bye.